Throughout FNaF's lifespan, there have been many raging debates within the theory community. However, with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach's DLC, Ruin, us theorists have had a new burning question to discuss. Is Burntrap the Mimic, or is he just Afton, and the Mimic is his own character? While there's been a lot of evidence for both sides, a majority of the community, from what I've seen, believes that Burntrap is indeed the Mimic. Despite that, a lot of people have argued against the idea and believe that the two are completely separate. However, today I want to present all of the evidence as to why Burntrap is 100% the Mimic, and hopefully convince you that these two are the same character. So, before I talk about anything else, I want to first look at the Mimic and Burntrap's designs. After all, if these two are indeed one and the same, it would make sense to see if they look alike or not. Now, a lot of people who don't think that the Mimic and Burntrap are the same will tell you that they can't be the same because their endoskeletons are completely different. Burntrap's endoskeleton is this weird hybrid of the Glamrock endoskeletons and the Nightmares endos from FNAF 4, while the Mimic more resembles the Endo 01 and Endo 02 models. However, what these people are leaving out is that in the books, the Mimic is specifically stated to have the ability to swap out his limbs and replace them with new ones. This means that if he damages or loses one of his limbs, he can just swap that out for a different limb. Not to mention the fact that the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, which I believe to be canon to the games, provide a perfect explanation as to why the Mimic would need to swap out his parts before the Burntrap boss fight. See, in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, they end with the Mimic getting crushed in a Springlock suit. And if we know anything about Springlock suits, these things can and will severely damage your body. So, if the Mimic was crushed inside one of the Springlock suits, then most of its parts would be either removed or severely damaged at the very least. So it would make sense that by the time Gregory finds him under the FNAF 6 location, he swapped out all of his damaged parts for new ones. And it would even make sense as to how he got these parts, because the first Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogue reveals that there were a bunch of different endoskeletons in the FNAF 6 building, which the Mimic took apart, so he would have plenty of parts to put on himself. Moving on to Burntrap's corpse, the books also have an explanation for this, and spoiler alert, it's not Afton's corpse. So, basically, in one of the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, someone tries to hide from the Mimic by wearing a Springlock suit. However, the Mimic crawls inside of the Springlock suit that the person is in, which unalives them. And, while never explicitly stated, it would make sense that the corpse of this person would be on the Mimic. And to add even more fuel to the fire, if you look up a picture of Burntrap's endoskeleton, the only part of it that you cannot see is his head, which is the one distinguishable feature of the Mimic. The next thing I want to talk about is both Burntrap's and the Mimic's movements and mannerisms. I know this isn't really something that seems too important or something that a lot of people paid attention to, but I actually think that how these characters move and their general mannerisms are pretty important in determining if they're the same or not. Starting off with Burntrap, he is definitely a slow-moving character, which is clearly shown through his boss fight. The guy just kind of hobbles around from room to room, and even takes breaks to literally just stand there in the corner. Even in the end cutscene, where by all means Burntrap should be sprinting for his life, just kind of slowly walks forward before the blob drags him away. Now, let's contrast that with the Mimic, who is clearly a much more live and energetic character. In both Ruin and the books, the Mimic is very active, running around caves, unaliving people, or ripping his arm out of a closed elevator. So you're probably asking, how could these characters possibly be the same when one has the agility of a 16-year-old and the other has the agility of a 216-year-old? Well, I once again point to that Springlock failure from the books. Let's do a little thought experiment real quick. Let's say that all of your limbs have been severely damaged in an accident and you've recently replaced all of those limbs with new ones that you haven't gotten used to yet. Do you think that you would immediately be able to use all of these limbs perfectly? No. You would probably have a hard time using them for a bit. And since we don't know how far apart Ruin and the Tales epilogues are, it's possible that the Mimic had recently replaced his limbs, and as a result, is only able to do basic things like walking and moving his arms forward. Another mannerism that the Mimic and Burntrap share is moving their hand to make it seem like they are holding a white tiger plushie. Now, for some context, in the books, the Mimic used to carry around a white tiger plushie with him. However, at some point, he lost this tiger plushie, and despite that, his hand still looked like he was holding it years later. And we can see that in the Burntrap boss fight ending cutscene, he has one of his arms outstretched, which makes him look like he's carrying a plushie. We can also see the Mimic doing this in his chase scene during Ruin, and he's even doing it with the same arm as Burntrap. Now, the final piece of evidence I want to mention is the fact that Burntrap and the Mimic being the same would make a lot of sense story-wise. So, just to explain what I'm talking about, it is heavily implied in Tales from the Pizzaplex that the Mimic witnessed Afton commit the MCI, and this is why he's evil and stuff. Not only does this explain Glitchtrap, who is confirmed to be the same software that runs the Mimic, but it would also explain why the Mimic would want to look like Afton. It's because Afton was the last person he saw before Ruin who did something he could mimic, or he could potentially just straight up think he is Afton. And since we know that Scraptrap, aka Afton's last physical form, was in the FNaF 6 fire, whatever was left of the suit could easily have been salvaged by the Mimic, completing his look. In conclusion, everything from design to movements to story implications all lead me to the conclusion that Burntrap and the Mimic are the same character. Now, if you disagree, feel free to leave a comment and tell me why.